A Hell's Angel biker pushed a black maid into a shark-infested pool, and 2 minutes later, he was begging for mercy. It all starts at a rich man's mansion, where a tough biker decides to show his power by shoving a quiet maid into a pool everyone believes is filled with sharks. But the moment she hits the water, the walls lock down, the lights go red, and the whole party realizes this isn't a normal pool. It's a trap, an AI trap, built to expose violent people. And the biker? He's suddenly surrounded by holograms of his darkest secrets while drones close in on him from every angle. But here's the twist. This maid he tried to scare? She's the only one with the override key. And she won't use it unless he tells the truth about who he really is. So now the whole mansion is watching. Will he finally confess the truth? Or will the system destroy him before he gets the chance? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the manicured lawns of Montridge Estate. Security personnel in crisp black uniforms positioned themselves strategically around the sprawling property, while caterers hurried through the grand double doors carrying silver trays. The air hummed with anticipation as luxury vehicles began arriving, their polished surfaces gleaming in the warm light. Brutus Garrison felt the familiar tension in his shoulders as he guided his Harley through the ornate front gates, 2 fellow bikers following close behind. Their motorcycles rumbled across the cobblestone driveway, drawing disapproving glances from the arriving guests in their designer clothes. He caught fragments of their whispered conversations: security, criminals, dangerous, words that made his jaw clench. "Remember, boys," Brutus growled to his companions, "we're just here to watch the perimeter. No funny business." His weathered leather vest creaked as he dismounted, revealing glimpses of the tattoos that covered his arms and neck. Years of street fights and bar brawls had left their mark on his face, but it was the invisible scars that burned deepest, memories of fists and angry voices from a childhood he couldn't escape. Inside the mansion's grand ballroom, Denise Ward moved with quiet grace between clusters of chattering guests. Her simple black uniform stood in stark contrast to the glittering evening gowns surrounding her, but she carried herself with natural dignity. As she balanced a tray of champagne flutes, she caught sight of her reflection in one of the towering mirrors, a young widow who had rebuilt her life one careful step at a time. The collision happened in an instant. Denise turned from serving an elderly couple just as Brutus stepped backward, his attention drawn to movement near the garden doors. The champagne tray tilted, sending a cascade of golden liquid across his leather vest. The ballroom fell silent except for several sharp gasps and poorly concealed laughter. Brutus felt the familiar surge of heat rising from his chest to his neck. His hands clenched into fists as childhood taunts echoed in his mind, the same mocking laughter that had followed him through foster homes and juvenile detention centers. He saw the fear flash across Denise's face as she stepped back, her lips forming words of apology. But the rage was already in control. Before he could stop himself, his hands shot out, connecting with her shoulders. The force of his shove sent her stumbling backward through the open French doors and straight toward the estate's famous pool. Time seemed to slow as Denise fell. The setting sun caught the surface of the pool, creating diamond-like sparkles across the glass bottom. For a fraction of a second, Brutus could see dark shapes moving in the depths below. The sharks that were rumored to patrol these waters as part of Montridge's eccentric collection. Denise's scream cut through the evening air as she broke the surface. Water splashed up around her, soaking her uniform as she thrashed in panic. The gathered crowd surged forward, their shocked faces illuminated by sudden flashing red lights that bathed the entire pool area in an eerie glow. A mechanical whirring sound drew everyone's attention upward. The glass canopy that normally stood open to the sky began sliding shut with smooth precision, sealing the pool area like a massive terrarium. Through the chaos of shouting voices and running feet, Brutus stood frozen, his anger evaporating into horror as he watched the pool lights beneath Denise's struggling form shift to a deep, blood-red hue. Security guards rushed past him, their radios crackling with urgent voices. Guests scattered in all directions, champagne glasses abandoned on nearby tables. But Brutus couldn't move. The look of terror on Denise's face as she fell replayed in his mind, joining the parade of other moments when his anger had destroyed something he couldn't fix. In the crimson-tinted water, Denise's black uniform created a stark silhouette against the glass bottom. The dark shapes below seemed to be moving with more purpose now, drawn by the disturbance above. As the last section of the canopy locked into place with an ominous click, Brutus took an unconscious step backward, his throat tight with the realization that his impulsive action might have consequences far beyond anything he'd imagined. The pool enclosure now glowed like a massive aquarium filled with red light, transforming the elegant garden setting into something out of a nightmare. Emergency klaxons began to sound throughout the estate, their wailing harmonizing with the screams still echoing across the water. In that moment, standing at the edge of chaos he'd created, Brutus felt the familiar weight of guilt pressing down on him. But this time, there would be no walking away from what he'd done. The chaos around the pool erupted into a new level of confusion as sleek mechanical arms smoothly emerged from concealed panels along the pool's edge. The chrome appendages moved with precise, fluid motions, gently lifting Denise from the crimson-tinted water. She coughed several times, water dripping from her soaked uniform, but appeared otherwise unharmed as the mechanical system carefully deposited her onto the safety of the pool deck. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm." The commanding voice cut through the commotion, drawing all eyes upward to a second-floor balcony. There stood Elias Montridge, the estate's owner, his silver hair catching the last rays of sunlight as he gripped the ornate railing. "What you've just witnessed is the activation of our advanced behavioral assessment system. The pool serves as an ethical testing ground designed to evaluate responses to confrontation and potential violence." Brutus's jaw clenched as he processed this information, his leather vest still damp from the spilled champagne. The water beneath the glass bottom began to shimmer and ripple, revealing what appeared to be massive sharks circling in the depths. Their sleek forms cast elongated shadows across the pool floor, but something about their movement seemed too perfect, too calculated. "Holographic projections," someone in the crowd whispered, and Brutus noticed the slight pixelation at the edges of the shark fins as they cut through the water. His relief at learning the sharks weren't real quickly gave way to a new kind of unease as he realized the true nature of what he'd stumbled into. Denise, now wrapped in a thick white towel provided by staff, stood near the base of a curved staircase leading to Montridge's position. Despite her drenched state, she carried herself with remarkable composure. Her voice, though quiet, carried clearly to where Brutus stood as she addressed her employer. "Subject failed the empathy threshold, sir. Initial response time 0.8 seconds. Aggressive contact confirmed." The clinical nature of her assessment made Brutus's stomach turn. He took a step forward, his boots scraping against the expensive tile. "Look, I didn't mean to. I shouldn't have." The words tangled in his throat, coming out in awkward chunks that made him sound as graceless as he felt. Here was a man who could stare down rival gang members without flinching, yet he couldn't string together a simple apology. Around him, the murmur of the crowd grew more hostile. Several guests had their phones raised, recording his discomfort for whatever social media feed would generate the most views. The harsh judgment in their eyes reminded him of courthouse corridors and parole hearings. "Attention!" Montridge's voice boomed through hidden speakers. "Ethics Protocol 7 Alpha is now in effect. All exits will be temporarily sealed while the AI completes its behavioral analysis. Please remain in your designated areas until further notice." As if responding to some hidden signal, the mansion's elegant lighting system began to dim, creating pools of shadow between islands of soft illumination. Outside, the distinctive hum of drones filled the air as several sleek units took up position around the property's perimeter, their camera eyes glowing like artificial stars in the growing dusk. 2 security guards approached Brutus, their movements careful but purposeful. "Sir, please come with us to the evaluation pavilion." Their tone was professional, leaving no room for argument. Brutus caught a glimpse of Denise being led in the opposite direction, toward what appeared to be a medical station equipped with warming lights and monitoring equipment. As he followed his escorts across the manicured lawn, Brutus's mind raced. The way Denise had analyzed his response, her immediate rapport with Montridge, the clinical terminology she used, it all painted a picture far more complex than a simple serving staff member. She moved with the confidence of someone who knew exactly what role she was playing in this elaborate setup. The central pavilion loomed ahead, its modern glass walls now illuminated from within by a soft blue glow. Inside, Brutus could see various screens and monitoring equipment that seemed better suited to a research facility than a billionaire's garden party. Each step toward the structure felt like moving deeper into a trap of his own making, sprung by a moment of anger he couldn't take back. More guests were being directed to comfortable waiting areas, their evening wear now incongruous with the serious atmosphere that had descended over the estate. The mechanical hum of the AI system could be felt more than heard, a subtle vibration that seemed to pulse through the ground itself as it processed the evening's events. Through the gathering darkness, Brutus watched Denise's figure disappear into the warming station. Even from a distance, her movements were composed, deliberate, those of someone executing a well-rehearsed protocol rather than recovering from a traumatic experience. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. He hadn't just assaulted a maid, he'd triggered some kind of elaborate ethical examination, and he had a sinking feeling he'd already failed. The pavilion doors slid open with a soft hiss as they approached. Inside, monitors displayed scrolling data and behavioral metrics that meant nothing to Brutus, but seemed to fascinate the technicians stationed at various workstations. The guards directed him to a chair that looked more like something from a high-tech dental office than standard waiting room furniture. "Please be seated," one of the guards instructed. "The AI will begin its preliminary assessment shortly." As Brutus lowered himself into the chair, he caught his reflection in one of the dark screens, a tattooed, leather-clad figure surrounded by gleaming technology and scientific precision. He'd never felt more out of place, or more trapped by the consequences of his own actions. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the pavilion's polished floors as Brutus sat rigidly in the observation circle. Above him, 3 sleek drones maintained constant surveillance, their quiet hum a reminder of his captivity. The chair, though ergonomically designed, felt like a throne of needles beneath him. He wasn't used to sitting still, to being watched, to waiting. Through the pavilion's crystal-clear walls, he observed the party's remains. Most guests had been escorted to comfortable holding areas, their evening finery now seeming oddly out of place against the clinical atmosphere that had descended over Montridge Estate. Security personnel moved with practiced efficiency, maintaining order while the AI system continued its mysterious calculations. Denise stood with Elias Montridge near the main house, her wet hair pulled back in a neat bun that made her look more like an executive than the maid she'd pretended to be. She gestured occasionally as she spoke, her movements measured and professional. Despite the soaking he'd given her, she carried herself with unmistakable dignity. Brutus found himself studying her face, trying to understand how he'd so completely misread the situation. The evening light softened, painting the sky in deepening shades of purple and orange. Security lights began to activate across the grounds, creating pools of artificial daylight that seemed to push back against the encroaching darkness. Brutus watched as Denise concluded her conversation with Elias and made her way toward the pavilion, her steps purposeful. When she entered, the air seemed to change, becoming charged with unspoken questions. She pulled up a chair, maintaining a careful distance that felt more professional than fearful. Up close, Brutus could see the compassion in her eyes, which somehow made him feel worse than if she'd shown anger. "Mr. Garrison," she began, her voice steady, "I think we need to have an honest conversation about what happened today." Brutus shifted uncomfortably. "You're not really a maid," he said. It wasn't a question. "No." A small smile touched her lips. "I'm an ethics decoy. I work with Mr. Montridge's rehabilitation programs, helping to identify individuals who might benefit from intervention before violence escalates beyond control." The words hit Brutus like physical blows. He'd been tested without knowing it, and he'd failed spectacularly. "So you provoked me on purpose?" His voice came out rougher than he intended. "I created a situation that might trigger an emotional response," she corrected gently. "How you chose to respond was entirely up to you." For the first time in years, Brutus felt something crack in his carefully maintained facade. He started, then had to clear his throat. "I shouldn't have pushed you. That's not—" He struggled with the words, unused to vulnerability. "That's not who I want to be anymore." Denise leaned forward slightly, her expression softening. "I sense you mean that, Mr. Garrison, but I need you to understand something crucial. The AI system we use here doesn't respond to partial truths or good intentions. It analyzes patterns, both visible and hidden. It sees the whole person, including the parts we try to hide from ourselves." "What does that mean for me?" Brutus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Before Denise could answer, Elias Montridge entered the pavilion. His presence filled the space with an almost tangible authority. He studied Brutus for a long moment before speaking. "Mr. Garrison, your situation is complicated. However, I believe in second chances when they're earned." He paused, letting the words sink in. "If you're willing to cooperate fully with our evaluation process, there's a possibility you could still clear the ethics threshold." Hope flickered in Brutus's chest, small but unmistakable. "I'll tell you whatever you need to know," he said quickly. "I can explain." A sudden harsh beeping cut through his words. Red warning lights began flashing across the pavilion's monitoring stations. The AI's synthesized voice filled the room. "Warning. Subject exhibits high-risk behavioral patterns, initiating containment protocols." Before Brutus could react, transparent panels shot up from the floor around him, forming a seamless evaluation chamber. He sprang to his feet, but it was too late. He was sealed inside. "Wait!" he shouted, pounding his fist against the glass. "I wasn't finished!" But his protests died in his throat as holographic images began materializing around him. Brutal arrest scenes played out in three-dimensional detail, his younger self fighting police, resisting arrest, causing harm. Each image was a perfect recreation, pulled from police records and security footage, showing moments he'd tried desperately to forget. "Multiple arrests detected," the AI announced dispassionately. "Pattern indicates escalating violent tendencies." Brutus slammed his palms against the transparent barrier, watching helplessly as more holograms flickered to life around him. Each one showed a moment of rage, a loss of control, a choice he couldn't take back. The nightlights of the estate twinkled beyond his prison, seeming to mock his situation as darkness settled fully over the grounds. "Please," he said, his voice hoarse, "please listen." But the holograms continued their merciless display, forcing him to confront every violent moment of his past, while Denise and Elias watched from beyond the glass, their expressions unreadable in the shifting light of his projected failures. The estate's floodlights cast long shadows across the manicured grounds as night settled in. Inside the evaluation chamber, Brutus stood rigid, forced to confront his own history through the AI's unforgiving lens. Holographic scenes materialized around him in vivid detail, each one a chapter of violence he'd tried to forget. A bar fight erupted in shimmering light, his younger self throwing the first punch, chairs splintering, blood spattering across worn floorboards. The scene shifted to a dark alley where his biker gang cornered rivals, chains and brass knuckles glinting in streetlight. Then came the war footage, desert combat, explosions, the terrible choices made in split seconds that haunted him still. "This isn't right!" Brutus slammed his palm against the transparent wall. "You can't just dig through my life like this!" The AI's voice remained clinically detached. Subject displays consistent pattern of emotional suppression, analyzing trauma response indicators. Data streams overlaid the projections, heart rate, cortisol levels, micro-expressions of rage and fear flickering across his face. From beyond the chamber walls, Denise stepped forward, her expression troubled as she watched Brutus struggle. "Mr. Montridge," she said, turning to Elias, "we need to give him a chance to explain himself. These recordings only show actions, not intent or remorse." "The AI's analysis is thorough," Elias replied, studying the scrolling data. "Every violent episode builds a clearer behavioral profile." "But it's missing the human element," Denise insisted. "Let me talk to him, person to person, not through an algorithm." Brutus pressed closer to the glass, his breathing heavy as more scenes played out around him. "Please," he said, his voice rougher than he intended. "Just make it stop." Elias considered for a long moment, then nodded. "Pause evaluation sequence," he commanded. The holograms froze mid-scene, their light casting eerie shadows across Brutus's face. "You may use the interface room, Ms. Ward. Standard safety protocols will remain active." A section of the chamber wall slid open, revealing a small intermediary room with comfortable chairs and soft lighting. Denise entered, settling into one of the seats while maintaining eye contact with Brutus through the remaining barrier. "Mr. Garrison," she said quietly, "would you like to tell me what's really driving your anger?" Brutus paced the chamber like a caged animal. "What's the point? That machine's already decided what I am." "The AI sees patterns, but it doesn't understand context." "I do." She leaned forward. "Talk to me. Help me understand where this started." Something in her steady gaze broke through his defenses. Brutus sank heavily into the chair opposite her, separated by the final glass wall. "You want to know where it started?" His voice came out barely above a whisper. "Try being 8 years old, listening to your mother cry every night because your old man's drunk again." Denise remained silent, encouraging him to continue. "I learned real quick that being scared meant being weak, and being weak meant—" He swallowed hard. "I couldn't protect her when I was weak, so I got strong, got mean. Figured out that's all anyone respects." "You were trying to protect her," Denise said softly. "Fat lot of good it did." Brutus stared at his hands. "By the time I was big enough to stand up to him, she was already gone. Cancer. And I wasn't there because I was too busy playing soldier, thinking I could save the world instead. The words started coming faster now, like a dam breaking. Got my best friend killed over there? Thompson, kid from Ohio who never should have been in combat. I told him to take point that day. I told him. His voice cracked. Been carrying that ever since. Easier to stay angry than feel anything else, you know? Denise's eyes shone with understanding. The violence became a shield. It's all I know, Brutus admitted. You hit first, hit hard, nobody sees what's really broken inside. He looked up, meeting her gaze. But I'm tired. God, I'm so tired of being that person. For the first time since entering the chamber, Brutus felt truly seen. Not as a threat or a statistic, but as someone carrying wounds that had never properly healed. I believe you, Denise said after a moment. And I will advocate for you to enter rehabilitation rather than detention. You've shown genuine remorse and self-awareness tonight. That matters. Hope flickered in Brutus's chest, but before he could respond, the AI's voice cut through the moment. Resuming full evaluation protocols. Interface period concluded. Wait. Brutus started, but the chamber doors were already sealing shut. Denise stood, pressing her hand briefly against the glass. I'll return in the morning, she promised. Try to rest, Mr. Garrison. This isn't over yet. The chamber hummed with renewed power as midnight approached. Through the windows, Brutus could see the estate's grounds bathed in moonlight, the surveillance drones maintaining their silent vigil. Inside his illuminated prison, he remained standing, watching Denise's retreating form and clinging to the small comfort of having finally spoken his truth aloud. The first rays of sunlight crept through the tall windows of the evaluation hall, painting stripes of gold across the polished floor. Denise Ward made her way down the corridor, stifling a yawn as she clutched a thick manila folder to her chest. Dark circles under her eyes betrayed her sleepless night spent poring over Brutus Garrison's case file. Through the observation window, she could see him sitting on the floor of the chamber, his broad shoulders slumped with exhaustion. The AI had kept him awake all night, projecting scene after scene from his past. Confrontations outside bars, intimidation tactics with rival gangs, faces of people he'd frightened or hurt over the years. Good morning, Mr. Garrison, Denise spoke softly through the intercom. How are you holding up? Brutus lifted his head slowly, and she could see the toll the night had taken. His eyes were bloodshot, his usual defensive posture replaced by something more vulnerable. They won't stop, he said hoarsely. Every time I close my eyes, that machine shows me another person He trailed off, running a hand over his face. Denise settled into the chair beside the intercom panel. Instead of trying to block them out, maybe we could talk about what you're seeing. Sometimes reflecting on our past actions helps us understand them better. The holographic displays shifted, showing a younger Brutus threatening a store owner. The real Brutus watched, his jaw tightening. Guy owed protection money, he said quietly. I was supposed to scare him, make an example. Didn't think about his kids being in the back room. Didn't think about anything except doing my job. And how does watching it now make you feel? Brutus was silent for a long moment. Sick, he finally admitted. Those kids, they probably still have nightmares about that day, about me. The AI's monitoring panel flickered with new data. Subject displaying signs of emergent remorse. As morning stretched into afternoon, Denise guided Brutus through more memories. With each conversation, his responses became more introspective, less defensive. He described growing up in a household where violence was the only language spoken, how joining the military had given him structure, but couldn't erase his ingrained responses to conflict. The gang became my family after I got out, he explained. They didn't judge me for being angry. They rewarded it. I understand seeking belonging, Denise said. After I lost Kevin, my husband, I felt so lost. We'd grown up in the same poor neighborhood, dreaming of a better life together. When he died, those dreams died too. Brutus turned toward her voice with newfound interest. What changed? I found a mentorship program through my church, started working with troubled teens, seeing how many of them just needed someone to believe in them. She smiled softly. It gave me purpose again, showed me that pain doesn't have to define us. Is that why you do this work now? Trying to save lost causes like me? You're not a lost cause, Mr. Garrison. The fact that these images disturb you proves that. Their conversation continued as afternoon light faded to evening. Brutus shared more details about his childhood, about watching his mother's spirit break under his father's cruelty. Denise listened with genuine empathy, and gradually, she saw his walls beginning to lower. I never thought I'd trust anyone enough to talk about this stuff, he admitted, especially not after what I did to you yesterday. Sometimes trust has to start with forgiveness, Denise replied. Suddenly, a loud crack of thunder shook the building. The lights flickered ominously as rain began pelting the windows. The evaluation chamber's power supply wavered, causing the holographic projections to stutter and fade. I should alert Mr. Montridge about these power fluctuations, Denise said, rising from her chair. The backup systems should have kicked in by now. As she turned toward the door, a security drone that had been hovering near the ceiling began spinning erratically. Its navigation lights flashed red as it careened toward her position. Without hesitation, Brutus launched himself forward, slamming against the chamber wall. "Look out!" he shouted. The drone's malfunction had caused the chamber's safety protocols to disengage. As the barrier disappeared, Brutus burst through the space, tackling Denise out of the way just as the drone crashed where she had been standing. Sparks showered around them as they hit the floor, Brutus's body shielding her from the impact. For a moment they lay there in stunned silence, the only sound their rapid breathing and the dying whir of the damaged drone. Denise slowly sat up, staring at Brutus with wide eyes. He had acted purely on instinct, not to hurt, but to protect. The man who had pushed her into a pool just yesterday had just risked himself to keep her safe. "Are you okay?" Brutus asked gruffly, checking her for injuries. Denise nodded, still processing what had just happened. The AI's assessment screen flashed a new message. Subject demonstrates significant behavioral evolution. Protective instinct overrides self-preservation. Kneeling beside him in the dim emergency lighting, Denise saw something she hadn't fully recognized before. Beneath all his layers of anger and guilt, Brutus Garrison had the capacity for profound change. He had just proved it without thinking twice. The maintenance team arrived swiftly after the drone incident, their boots squeaking on the polished floor as they worked to stabilize the system. 2 technicians carefully removed the damaged drone, while others reset the chamber's security protocols. Brutus cooperated quietly as they guided him back inside, though this time their hands were gentle on his shoulders, their faces showing something closer to respect than fear. "The safety barriers are restored," announced the lead technician, nodding to Denise. "All systems are running on backup power until we can verify the main grid's stability." Denise hurried to Elias's office, her heart still racing from the near miss. She found him reviewing security footage of the incident, his expression thoughtful as he watched Brutus's split-second decision to protect her. "He didn't hesitate," she said, standing beside Elias's desk. "There wasn't time to calculate or plan, he just acted." Elias rewound the footage, studying it again. Indeed, the AI's readings show a complete absence of self-interest in that moment. Pure protective instinct. He turned to face her. It's significant progress, especially given his history of aggressive responses to stress. Throughout the afternoon, the AI system ran Brutus through a series of new scenarios. Virtual simulations placed him in situations where others were in danger: a child running into traffic, an elderly man falling on stairs, a woman being harassed. Each time, Brutus's responses were measured and analyzed. Denise visited regularly, carrying bottles of water and maintaining their growing connection. During one visit, she found him sitting cross-legged on the chamber floor, looking drained but somehow lighter. "How are you holding up?" she asked through the intercom. "Tired," he admitted. "But okay, these tests, they make me think about things differently." She settled into her usual chair. "What kind of things? Like, why I always chose to hurt instead of help?" He took a long drink of water. "Guess I never thought I had the right to be the good guy. And now?" "Now." Brutus looked down at his hands, the same hands that had pushed her yesterday, that had hurt so many people over the years. "Now I'm wondering if maybe I've been wrong about that." Throughout their conversations, Denise asked gentle but probing questions that helped Brutus unlock emotions he'd buried deep inside. He spoke about the shame he'd felt as a child, watching other kids play while he nursed bruises from his father's latest outburst. He described the longing for acceptance that had led him to the gang, and the fear that he'd never be anything more than what others expected him to be: violent, dangerous, beyond saving. "I used to think being feared meant being respected," he said softly. "Took me way too long to realize they're not the same thing." The afternoon light was fading when Elias returned, tablet in hand. The AI's latest evaluation scores scrolled across his screen, showing a dramatic upward trend in empathy responses and emotional regulation. "Mr. Garrison," Elias announced, "your progress has been remarkable. You've moved from the high-risk category to within our redemption threshold parameters." He adjusted his glasses. "While there's still work to be done, this represents a significant shift in your behavioral patterns." The security staff who had been monitoring the chamber throughout the day now gathered at the observation windows, their earlier hostility replaced by curious glances and quiet conversations. One guard who had roughly handled Brutus the day before now stood with arms crossed, nodding appreciatively at the evaluation results. "See?" Denise said, her smile warming the room. "I knew you had it in you. You've come so far in such a short time." Brutus ducked his head, unused to praise. "Had a good teacher," he mumbled. As evening settled over the estate, the AI's central interface illuminated with a new message. "Final integration review scheduled, so 900 hours tomorrow." The chamber's lights dimmed to their nighttime setting, creating a peaceful atmosphere. Brutus sat on the floor, his back against the wall, feeling strangely calm. For the first time since he could remember, he wasn't burning with anger or drowning in guilt. Instead, he felt something unfamiliar: hope. Looking at his reflection in the chamber's glass, he saw past the tattoos and scars to something new emerging: the possibility of a different kind of strength, one built on protection rather than destruction. The man who had arrived at the estate ready for a fight was slowly being replaced by someone who could imagine a better future. The night security shift took their positions as Denise prepared to leave. She paused at the chamber's intercom one last time. "Get some rest," she said softly. "Tomorrow's an important day." Brutus nodded, settling into his corner. The estate grew quiet around him, but his mind was peaceful, filled not with the usual chaos of regret and rage, but with thoughts of who he might become. For once, the future didn't look like a threat. It looked like an opportunity. Dawn broke over the Montridge estate, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. The morning dew sparkled on manicured lawns as staff members prepared for what they hoped would be Brutus Garrison's final evaluation. Inside the chamber, Brutus sat straight-backed on the simple chair provided, his usual intimidating presence softened by exhaustion and vulnerability. The AI's interface hummed to life at precisely 9 o'clock in the morning, its holographic displays creating a gentle blue glow throughout the chamber. "Beginning final integration review," the system announced in its measured tone. Denise Ward stood at her usual observation position, her hands clasped together in silent prayer. She hadn't slept well, too invested in the outcome of this evaluation to find rest. Dark circles under her eyes betrayed her fatigue, but her gaze remained steady and hopeful. The AI began projecting a series of memories onto the chamber walls. Unlike the previous day's harsh confrontations, these images focused on quieter moments. Times when Brutus had walked away from fights, instances where he'd shown unexpected gentleness, opportunities for violence that he'd chosen to ignore. "Please describe your emotional response to these moments," the AI prompted. Brutus shifted in his chair, his voice rough with emotion. "Those were the times I felt weak." He paused, correcting himself. "No, not weak. Scared. Scared because doing the right thing felt harder than throwing a punch." The projection shifted, showing scenes from the previous day, his interaction with Denise, the moment he'd protected her from the malfunctioning drone, their conversations through the chamber glass. "You demonstrate significant behavioral variation from your historical patterns," the AI noted. "Please elaborate on this shift." Brutus looked down at his tattooed hands, then up at Denise through the glass. "I've been carrying this weight for so long," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "Violence, anger, they were easy, familiar. But kindness?" He gestured toward Denise. "That scares me more than any fight I've ever been in." The AI's sensors recorded elevated heart rate and increased emotional markers as Brutus continued to speak. "I don't deserve the way she looks at me, like I'm worth saving. Every time she shows me kindness, it's like a mirror showing me all the ways I've failed to be human." Elias Montridge, standing at his control station, nodded, approvingly, as the evaluation scores continued to climb. The readouts showed unprecedented levels of emotional authenticity and self-awareness. "The hardest part," Brutus continued, his voice growing stronger, "isn't admitting the violence. It's admitting how much I've hidden from myself, how many times I chose the easy way out instead of facing what I'd done, how many people I hurt because I was too scared to be anything else." Tears threatened at the corners of his eyes, but he blinked them back. The chamber's lights pulsed softly, recording every micro-expression and vocal tremor. Denise moved closer to the chamber, placing her hand against the glass. The simple gesture carried such weight that several staff members turned away, moved by the intimacy of the moment. "Thank you," Brutus said, looking directly at her, "for seeing something in me I couldn't see myself." The evaluation progress bar neared 100% completion. Staff members gathered around the chamber, sensing the significance of the moment. Some who had initially viewed Brutus with suspicion now watched with evident hope for his success. Elias stepped forward, preparing to announce the final results. The AI's display showed 98% complete, 99%. Suddenly, the progress bar froze. The chamber's ambient lighting shifted from warm white to cool blue. "Processing additional data," the AI announced. "New information requires integration." The gathered staff exchanged confused looks. Denise's hand dropped from the glass as the chamber's main display screen flickered to life. Security footage appeared, time-stamped from the evening before the gala. The grainy video showed Brutus in the estate's parking area, speaking with two other bikers. Their conversation was muted, but their body language suggested secretive planning. One biker pointed toward the mansion's west wing, making gestures that mimicked movement patterns. The color drained from Denise's face as she watched. Her hand rose to cover her mouth, eyes wide with disbelief. The footage continued, showing what appeared to be the three men discussing entry points and timing. The AI's voice cut through the stunned silence. Retrieved security footage suggests premeditation of criminal activity. Evaluation suspended pending full analysis of new data. The chamber's lights dimmed to emergency settings, casting long shadows across Brutus's suddenly pale face. The hope that had been building throughout the morning crumbled as quickly as it had formed, leaving only the weight of apparent betrayal hanging in the air. Denise stood frozen, her hand still pressed against her mouth, watching as the screens continued to display damning evidence of what appeared to be a planned robbery of the very estate that had offered Brutus a chance at redemption. Alert! Security breach detected. Subject reclassified as irredeemable threat level. The AI's voice boomed through the evaluation hall. Red warning. Lights flashed across the pristine walls as security drones swarmed into defensive formations, their metallic bodies humming with electricity. No, wait! Brutus slammed his palms against the chamber glass. That footage, it's not what you think. His voice cracked with desperation as he watched Denise's face, still frozen in shock. I backed out. I never went through with it. The drone's targeting lasers painted red dots across his chest as Elias Montridge stepped forward, his earlier approval replaced by deep disappointment. His silver hair caught the flashing lights as he shook his head slowly. I had such hopes, Mr. Garrison. Such hopes. The footage lacks complete temporal context, the AI announced, unable to verify subjects' claims without additional data. Elias straightened his silk tie, composing himself. Initiate temporary containment protocol until we can verify the truth of this situation. His voice carried the weight of authority, but also genuine regret. I'm sorry, but we cannot risk— Please, Brutus interrupted, his eyes fixed only on Denise. Just let me explain. The chamber's reinforced glass walls began to thicken with additional layers of security panels. Denise moved closer, her hand trembling as she reached toward the barrier between them. Her eyes searched his face, looking for any sign that would help her understand. Brutus's shoulders slumped. The fight drained from his body as he watched tears well in her eyes. Don't, he whispered, taking a step back from the glass. You deserve better than someone like me. You always did. The final security panel slid into place with a heavy thud. Brutus sank to the floor, his back against the far wall, head bowed in defeat. The man who had spent his life fighting everything and everyone now sat motionless, convinced he had lost the only person who had ever seen past his hardened exterior to the wounded soul beneath. Hours crawled by. The estate grew quiet as night settled over the grounds. Most staff had gone home, leaving only essential security personnel to monitor the containment systems. In Elias's wood-paneled office, Denise sat alone at his computer terminal, her eyes burning from watching the security footage over and over. She rubbed her tired face, then leaned forward again, determined. Something wasn't adding up. The timestamps flickered across the bottom of the screen as she rewound the footage for the 100th time. 3 bikers in the parking lot, gesturing towards the mansion, their mouths moving in conversation, but no audio to reveal their words. Wait, she muttered, squinting at the numbers. She grabbed a notepad and began writing down the timestamps, comparing them to the estate's main security logs. Her pen moved quickly as she cross-referenced the data. The recording. It starts in the middle. She stood up so quickly her chair rolled backward. Computer, display full security log from that evening. Numbers scrolled across the screen as Denise's heart began to race. There was a gap, a crucial missing segment of time between when the bikers first arrived and when the damning conversation began. The footage they had all watched started mid-conversation, missing vital context. "Show me the thermal imaging for the full parking lot during the missing time segment," she commanded. The screen filled with heat signatures. 3 figures in the parking lot, but their positioning told a different story. One figure, Brutus, was walking away from the other 2. The timestamps showed this happened before the conversation they had all witnessed. "He did back out," Denise whispered. "The footage we saw was them trying to convince him to come back to the plan, not him agreeing to it." She glanced at the clock on the wall. 2 o'clock in the morning. Less than 4 hours until dawn, when the AI would finalize its classification and permanently mark Brutus as irredeemable. Her chair clattered to the floor as she stood, gathering her evidence with trembling hands. The office door closed behind her with a soft click as she hurried down the hallway, her footsteps echoing with urgency. She had to reach Elias, had to make him understand before it was too late. The missing footage might be the key to proving what her heart had known all along, that beneath Brutus's hardened exterior lay a man truly fighting to change. The night security guards looked up in surprise as she rushed past, clutching her papers like precious cargo. She had mere hours to clear his name, to prove that sometimes the most important truths lie in what isn't seen rather than what is. Through the estate's towering windows, the stars twinkled indifferently, marking the slow march toward dawn. In his chamber, Brutus sat in darkness, unaware that the woman he thought he'd lost was racing against time to save him from a fate he believed he deserved. The estate's data analysis lab hummed with the soft whir of servers and cooling systems. At 3:15 in the morning, most of the equipment sat idle, screens displaying gentle screensaver patterns in the dimness. Denise burst through the doors, startling the lone technician who was doing routine system maintenance. "Jenny, I need your help," Denise said breathlessly, clutching her stack of timestamp evidence. "It's about Brutus's security footage." The young technician pushed her glasses up her nose, looking uncertain. "We're not supposed to access classified evaluation data without proper authorization." "Please," Denise pleaded, spreading her papers across the nearest workstation. "Look at these timestamps. There's missing footage. The AI is going to make a permanent decision based on incomplete information." Jenny studied the numbers, her brow furrowing. "You're right. There's definitely a gap here." She glanced at the clock, then back at Denise's desperate expression. "Okay, give me 5 minutes. But if anyone asks, you convinced me this was an emergency system. Integrity check." Her fingers flew across the keyboard, bypassing security protocols and diving deep into the raw data storage. Multiple screens lit up with cascading code as she worked. Denise paced behind her, every minute feeling like an hour as dawn crept closer. "Got it," Jenny announced. The full recording was automatically archived when the edited version was flagged for review. "Loading it now?" The main screen flickered to life, showing the parking lot scene they'd all witnessed before. But this time, it started earlier. Denise leaned forward, holding her breath as she watched. "I'm done with this life," Brutus's voice came through clearly. "All it's brought me is pain and regret. I want honest work for once." One of the other bikers stepped toward him aggressively. "You're going soft, Garrison. This is a golden opportunity. Montridge's place will be packed with rich folks' stuff tomorrow night." "No." Brutus's response was firm. He turned his back on them, starting to walk away. "Find someone else for your scheme. I'm out." The footage continued, showing the conversation they'd seen before. The other bikers trying to change his mind, making threats. but Brutus remained unmoved. The truth was there in black and white. He had rejected the robbery plan before it even started. Denise's eyes filled with tears of relief. "Jenny, can you send this to my tablet? I need to get to Elias immediately." The technician nodded, tapping a few commands. "Done. Go quickly. It's almost 4 o'clock." Denise ran through the silent corridors of the mansion, her footsteps muffled by thick carpeting. She took the stairs 2 at a time to reach Elias's private quarters on the 3rd floor. Her knuckles rapped urgently against his heavy wooden door. "Mr. Montridge, please wake up. It's an emergency." After a moment that felt like forever, she heard movement inside. Elias opened the door in his silk robe, looking annoyed until he saw her expression. "Denise, what's wrong?" She thrust her tablet toward him. "You need to see this. The footage of Brutus. We didn't have the whole story." Elias took the tablet, squinting at the screen, as Denise quickly explained what she'd discovered. His face grew more serious as he watched the complete recording. "The AI's assessment was based on partial data," he murmured. "This changes everything." He looked up sharply. "What time is the final classification scheduled?" 5 a.m., Denise answered. "We have less than an hour." Elias was already moving, grabbing a coat. "Let's go. We'll need to manually override the containment protocols." They hurried through the mansion's winding hallways toward the evaluation wing. The sky outside was starting to lighten, the first hint of dawn approaching. Denise's heart pounded with each step, praying they weren't too late. Through the observation windows, they could see Brutus sitting cross-legged on the chamber floor. His eyes were closed, his usual fierce expression, replaced by something softer, more vulnerable. His lips moved slightly in what appeared to be prayer. Denise pressed her hand against the glass, struck by the change in him. This wasn't a man plotting escape or nursing anger. This was someone finding peace with whatever came next, choosing to face it with dignity rather than rage. "Brutus," she called out softly through the intercom. His eyes opened, finding her immediately. The look on his face, hope warring with disbelief, made her throat tight with emotion. He stood slowly, moving closer to the glass. Elias stepped up to the control panel, entering his override codes. "The AI needs to process the new evidence before the containment protocols activate," he explained. "Denise, as his primary evaluator, you'll need to make the final assessment once the system updates." Screens flickered to life around them, displaying Brutus's complete profile. The chamber's internal lights shifted from red to amber as the AI began incorporating the new data. Denise watched as his threat assessment scores recalculated, taking into account his rejection of criminal activity and his consistent choice of reform over violence. Through it all, Brutus stood quietly, his eyes never leaving Denise's face. In them, she could see not just hope for freedom, but something deeper. Trust in her judgment, acceptance of whatever she decided, and most surprisingly, a gentle concern for her obvious exhaustion. The chamber's main control panel lit up, awaiting final authorization. Denise stepped forward, her hand hovering over the interface that would determine Brutus's fate. The pre-dawn light filtered through the windows, painting everything in shades of possibility as she prepared to make her decision. The chamber's manual override systems hummed to life, casting a soft blue glow across the evaluation hall. Denise's fingers closed around the small metallic override key hanging from a chain at her neck, a device she'd only used twice before in her years of ethical evaluation work. Its weight felt especially heavy this morning. Brutus watched her through the glass, his weathered face showing a vulnerability that made him look younger somehow, more like the boy he must have been before life hardened him. The chamber's barrier began to lower with a gentle whir, the sound echoing in the quiet hall. The footage showed everything, Brutus, Denise said softly, stepping closer. You walked away from that robbery before it even started. You chose a better path even when no one was watching. Brutus swallowed hard, his hands trembling slightly at his sides. I didn't think anyone would believe me. Didn't think I deserved to be believed, if I'm honest. The truth was there all along, she replied, moving toward the control console. In the footage, yes, but more importantly, in your actions here. In your willingness to face your past. In the way you protected me without thinking of yourself. Elias stood a few steps back, his usual stern expression softened by what looked like respect. He nodded encouragingly as Denise raised the override key to the console's input slot. I never... Brutus's voice cracked, and he had to start again. I never thought someone like me could change. Thought I was too far gone, you know? But you... He shook his head, struggling to find the words. You saw something in me I couldn't see myself. The key slid into place with a soft click. Around them, screens flickered as the AI's classification systems began to shift, replacing the harsh red, irredeemable warning with softer amber text indicating classification in review. Change is always possible, Denise said firmly, watching the progress bars advance across the screens. But it starts with facing the truth about ourselves, both the darkness and the light. A small crowd had begun to gather at the hall's entrance. Security staff who had once viewed Brutus with suspicion now stood quietly, bearing witness to the moment. Even the technicians who maintained the AI system paused in their work, sensing the weight of what was unfolding. The chamber doors released with a gentle hiss of hydraulics, sliding open completely for the first time in days. Brutus didn't move at first, as if unsure he had the right to step through them. It's all right, Denise encouraged him, extending her hand. You're free to walk out. Brutus took one hesitant step, then another. His boots made soft sounds against the polished floor as he emerged from the chamber that had held him. He looked dazed, like someone walking into sunlight after too long in darkness. When he swayed slightly, Denise reached out instinctively, placing a steadying hand on his arm. The simple touch seemed to ground him, and he drew in a shaky breath. I don't know if I deserve this mercy, he whispered, his voice rough with emotion. That's exactly why you do, Denise replied, because you question it, because you understand the weight of it. Through the hall's tall windows, the morning sun had begun to rise in earnest, sending warm rays across the floor. The light caught the edges of Brutus's tattoos, softening their harsh lines. For the first time, Denise could see past them to the man beneath, someone who had carried pain for so long he'd forgotten how to set it down. The physical chains are the easiest ones to break, she said gently. It's the ones we carry inside that take the most work to release. Brutus nodded, understanding flickering in his eyes. I feel lighter, but also scared, if that makes any sense. Like I don't know who I am without all that weight. That's natural, Elias spoke up, stepping forward. Change is never simple, but you've shown remarkable progress in a very short time. The gathered staff members began to disperse, returning to their duties, but there was a new respect in how they looked at Brutus. Several even offered small smiles or nods of acknowledgement as they passed. Denise watched as Brutus took in his surroundings with new eyes, no longer a prisoner but not quite sure how to be free. She could see questions forming in his expression, about what came next, about how to maintain this fragile new beginning. This is just the start, she said softly, giving his arm a gentle squeeze. There's still work ahead, important work, but you don't have to do it alone anymore. The morning light continued to fill the hall, chasing away the last shadows of night. In its warm glow, Brutus stood straighter, as if physically shrugging off the chains of his past. For the first time since he'd arrived at the estate, his face held something that looked like peace. The morning sun had climbed higher in the sky when one of Elias's staff members approached Brutus and Denise with a polite bow. "Mr. Montridge would like to see you both in his private study," she said, gesturing toward the mansion's east wing. They followed her through corridors lined with artwork and artifacts, each step echoing against the marble floors. Brutus's leather vest creaked softly as he walked, a reminder of the life he was choosing to leave behind. When they reached a set of heavy wooden doors inlaid with brass, their guide knocked twice before opening them. Elias's study was a warm, welcoming space despite its grandeur. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined the walls, and morning light streamed through tall windows that overlooked the estate gardens. A comfortable seating area had been arranged near a fireplace, where a silver coffee service and pastries waited on a low table. "Please, sit," Elias invited them, indicating the plush armchairs. Kitchen staff moved quietly around them, pouring coffee into delicate cups and arranging fresh pastries on china plates. Brutus lowered himself carefully into one of the chairs, looking slightly out of place among the refined surroundings. His rough hands wrapped around the coffee cup, as if seeking something solid to hold on to. "I wanted to discuss your future," Elias began, his voice carrying the measured tone of someone who had given careful thought to his words. "As you may have gathered, this estate serves multiple purposes beyond simple charity events." He paused to sip his coffee, then continued, "I oversee several rehabilitation programs for veterans struggling to reintegrate into civilian life, former inmates working to rebuild their lives, young people at risk of falling into destructive patterns, people who society often gives up on, but who deserve a second chance." Brutus's shoulders tensed slightly at the mention of veterans, and Denise noticed his fingers tighten around his cup. "Your experience," Elias said, looking directly at Brutus, "combined with the remarkable honesty you've shown during your evaluation, makes you uniquely qualified to help others avoid the path you once walked." The big man's head snapped up, surprise evident in his expression. "Me?" he asked roughly. "Help others?" "Yes," Eliasu confirmed. "Your story, your struggles, your mistakes, and now your choice to change could be incredibly powerful for someone standing at the same crossroads you once faced." Brutus set his coffee cup down with trembling hands, overwhelmed by the suggestion. I don't know if I can," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "What if I mess up? What if I fail them?" Denise reached over and placed her hand on his arm, the gesture now familiar and comforting. "That fear you're feeling? That's exactly why you're ready for this," she said softly. "It shows you understand the responsibility, that you care about doing right by others." Elias nodded in agreement. "Nobody expects perfection, Brutus. We're offering you a chance to turn your past into something meaningful, to help others find their way to redemption, just as you have." Brutus drew a deep, shaky breath. When he spoke again, his voice was thick with emotion. "I want to try," he said. "I want to do something good with my life. It's scary as hell, you know?" "That's perfectly natural," Elias assured him. "You'll have support, training, and guidance. We'll start slowly, let you find your footing." After they finished their coffee and worked out some initial details, Denise suggested showing Brutus more of the estate grounds. They thanked Elias and made their way outside, where workers were busy returning the gardens to their normal state after the lockdown. They walked in comfortable silence for a while, following a winding path past flower beds and sculptured hedges. The afternoon sun had warmed the air, carrying the sweet scent of blooming roses. "It was hard, you know," Denise said suddenly, stopping to face him. "Watching you in that chamber, seeing you lose faith in yourself when the AI made that wrong judgment. Brutus turned to her, his expression vulnerable. "Your faith in me. It was the only thing that kept me going in there," he admitted. "Even when I thought it was all over, knowing you believed in me, it meant everything." They had reached the reflecting pond, where water lilies floated peacefully on the surface. Brutus stood looking at his reflection, so different from the angry man who had arrived at the estate just days ago. "I promise you," he said with quiet intensity, "I won't waste this chance. The trust you and Elias have shown me, I'm going to honor it. I'm going to make it mean something." Denise smiled up at him, her expression warm and gentle. The afternoon light caught the gold flecks in her eyes, and something tender passed between them, a connection born of shared struggle and mutual understanding. The water in the pond rippled softly, catching the sunlight and sending patterns dancing across their faces. Around them, the garden continued its peaceful renewal, much like the man standing beside it, ready at last to begin again. The early morning sun cast long shadows across the estate grounds as Brutus adjusted his freshly pressed shirt collar. 7 days had passed since his evaluation, each one filled with intensive preparation for this moment. The week had been a whirlwind of training sessions, beginning with basic counseling techniques and graduating to more complex emotional support strategies. Every morning he had met with Elias for 2 hours, learning the structure of the youth outreach program. Afternoons were spent with experienced mentors who taught him how to listen effectively and share his story in ways that could help others. Evenings often found him reviewing case files with Denise, who patiently helped him understand the delicate balance between honesty and hope when dealing with troubled youth. Now, standing before the mirror in his newly assigned office, Brutus hardly recognized himself. Gone was the leather vest and intimidating swagger. Instead, he wore dark jeans and a clean button-down shirt, his tattoos visible but no longer seeming quite so menacing. The classroom filled slowly with teenagers, their expressions a mixture of wariness and curiosity. 15 young faces looked up at him, each carrying stories of pain he recognized all too well. Some bore the hollow-eyed look of addiction, others the defensive posture of those who had lived too long on the streets. A few showed the telltale signs of violence, fresh bruises they tried to hide, or the hard shell of someone who had learned to fight before they learned to trust. From her position at the back of the room, Denise watched as Brutus took a deep breath and began to speak. "My name's Brutus," he said, his deep voice surprisingly gentle. "And a week ago, I was probably the last person anyone would expect to be standing here talking to you." He paused, looking at each face in turn. "I've been where many of you are. The anger, the violence, the feeling that the whole world expects you to be nothing but trouble. I lived that life for years." A boy in the back row shifted, uncrossing his arms slightly. A girl with faded purple hair lifted her head, really looking at him for the first time. "I'm not here to lecture you," Brutus continued. "I'm here because somehow, through some kind of miracle, I got a second chance. And I want you to know that you deserve one too." For the next 2 hours, Brutus shared his story. The childhood abuse, the military service, the years lost to anger and violence. He spoke about the moment at the estate's pool that changed everything, careful to emphasize his own accountability rather than blame others. The teenagers leaned forward as he described his time in the evaluation chamber, many nodding in recognition when he talked about facing his own truth. Throughout the session, Denise observed the subtle transformations happening in the room. She noticed how Brutus's authentic vulnerability drew them in, how his willingness to admit his mistakes made space for their own hope of change. When he spoke about his darkest moments, his voice carried no shame, only a deep understanding of how pain can shape a person's choices. As the morning session drew to a close, several teenagers lingered to ask questions. One boy, who hadn't spoken the entire time, finally raised his hand. "Did you really think you could change?" he asked quietly. "Like, for real?" Brutus met the boy's eyes with steady compassion. "Honestly? I didn't. I thought I was too far gone. But sometimes you need someone else to believe in you before you can believe in yourself." When the last student had left, Brutus and Denise walked together toward the estate's courtyard. The autumn air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and wood smoke from a distant groundskeeper's fire. "You were amazing in there," Denise said softly. "Did you see their faces when you talked about your father? They knew you understood." Brutus stopped walking, turning to face her. "You know what's crazy?" he said, running a hand through his hair. "For so long, I thought that's what the world wanted from me, to be the monster everyone expected, the scary biker, the violent thug. It was easier than trying to be anything else." Denise touched his arm gently. "And now?" "Now." He looked around at the peaceful grounds, then back at her face. "Now I understand that redemption isn't about what other people expect. It's about being honest enough to face yourself, and brave enough to change what you see." "That's exactly right," she agreed, her eyes bright with pride. "Redemption is never beyond reach for anyone willing to face the truth. I've always believed that." The sun was setting now, painting the sky in deep purples and oranges. Around them, garden lanterns began to flicker on, creating pools of warm light along the paths. Their soft glow caught the silver in Brutus's beard and the gentle smile that had become more frequent on his face this past week. "I need to thank you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "And not just for saving my life that day in the pool. You saved something more important. My soul, my future, my chance to do something good in this world. I don't know if I can ever repay that." Denise looped her arm through his as they turned toward the mansion's entrance. "You already are," she said softly. "Every time you help one of those kids see their own worth, you honor the gift you were given." Together they walked the lantern-lit path, their steps in perfect rhythm, moving forward into a future neither had imagined possible just days before. The warm lights of the mansion beckoned them home, promising new chapters of purpose, hope, and quiet companionship. If this story made you pause, reflect, or even smile, don't forget to subscribe. I post daily, and the next story might be exactly what you need to hear,